Welcome, welcome, everyone. We're back here again, the Wizards of Ox, for a session on one of my favorite topics, the Oxalate Dirty Dozen. Now, we do have a dozen foods we're going to talk through. We also have some what we are referring to as dishonorable mentions. And so we're going to have a little bit of fun with this, but it's a serious topic where these are the foods that sometimes can have been major contributors to the oxalate trouble that we might find ourselves in. So if you were one of those folks who was eating extra healthy and ended up on the Trying Low Oxalates group or following us as the Wizards of Ox on YouTube, these may have been some of the culprits in your particular journey. So we have with us today my fellow wizards. We have Karla De Wiersma coming from Colorado. We have Patricia De La Garza, who is actually in sunny Mexico. There she is. And we have our wonderful Susan Owens, who unfortunately is not at her home base and has a non-functional camera today, but she is with us nevertheless. And I am Monique Attinger. I am just outside of Toronto. And so you actually have 4 wizards coming to you from all over the North American continent this week. So we will get started though with our list of the villains, the oxalate villains, our dirty dozen. And if anybody has questions, if you want to put them in the chat, I will try to monitor those, and we will begin discussing these foods that you might want to consider, if not eliminating completely from your diet. And that's where we've probably all gone, at least reducing considerably and knowing what your alternatives are. As usual, this is not medical advice. This is us sharing our experience and our understanding of the oxalate levels in these foods. If you have specific medical questions, please speak with your trusted practitioner, and we will keep you educated on the foods that are high in oxalate today and where you may want to avoid them. So we're starting with one that I really have a particular issue with. It seems to be turning up everywhere. Everyone seems to think that it's got some really wonderful benefits to it. And that particular food is chaga mushroom. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this bad boy, chaga is being touted as a great addition to things like mushroom-based coffees or as a supplement for energy levels. And honestly, the oxalate level in this food is unbelievable. It's, in some cases, depending upon the actual sample that you have of chaga mushroom, could be as high as, did we see 20,000 milligrams? And just a ridiculous amount in like a 100-gram serving. So this is not a health benefit to you folks. Oxalate being pro-inflammatory, oxidative, there are other ways to get your mushroom benefits on. So anybody want to jump in on the alternatives now that I've kicked us off here?
Well, I'd love to jump in if I may. Just adding a little bit to this, I think there's a lot of concern and a lot of people saying that we demonize food, or that we say that food that everybody's saying is very healthy and very lovely and that it's not good for you, and that causes a lot of anxiety, and that causes a lot of concern and overwhelm, sometimes even paralysis. And I think when we're talking about these 12 bad boys, to call them anything, is really in a way to make you in a way to make you aware of some of these new foods, because a lot of us had never heard of, chaga tea in a long, long time, or we never had available historically, spinach in January. That was just not available. So this is like a new world, new economy, new fad diet. So we're not demonizing foods that have been traditionally consumed in large quantities forever. It's not the case at all. And I think this is going to be a very informative program so that you can also share with some of your friends that are going into all these health trends and seeing that they're not feeling so good. And they're thinking, this might be a bad reaction because I'm getting healthier. And so I think this is just a warning to the wise. And as far as substitutes, there are a lot of substitute to these foods, and there are a lot of things that we could do to get all those benefits without the backlash of oxalate. So I'm down for my soapbox. You guys can continue.
Well, I would like to say, though, while we're not saying that we want to demonize foods, there are foods that are just not healthy for us.
Yeah,
And
they're foods that are not really foods.
yeah, they're foods that are not like we don't eat every plant that's out there. And there's a reason why we don't eat every plant that's out there. So, some balance here in terms of what plants are good for you and what plants are not. We have lots of plants we'll talk about that are good for you. We're going to follow up a discussion on our dirty dozen with our clean 15, and there's places where you can go to enjoy a plant food and get benefits and not harm yourself. And Susan's got her hand up, so
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we get a lot of our information from watching what happens to animals. And it's true that if you have animals that are grazing on a bunch of turf and it has a lot of high oxalate things, they are going to develop oxalate problems. And so it's not that, we're unique in this sense. Oxalate is toxic really to other living things too. And so they all have different ways of handling that. There's some creatures that have figured out how to work around things. But we just need to understand that, people have traditions about, I'm going to have this in my field and not that in my field. And so a lot of those traditions are where we need to be. We need to be realizing that there's certain things that they have a long track record of it being eaten every day. But where we've gotten in trouble is the idea that we have to have the same availability of foods every day of the whole year. And that's when you get into trouble with the really high oxalate things.
Well, and with chaga, we have seen there are some studies where a couple of teaspoons of that a day for a couple of months put people in kidney failure when they actually looked at it and studied its chemical composition. One study noted that they'd never seen an organism with that much oxalate. Chaga mushroom is almost pure oxalate. And that's the main acid. So, and quite frankly, there are some foods where the downside is just more than the upside. So if you're doing, a cost benefit, analysis, the downside just outweighs any potential benefit that you get from it. And
yeah,
chaga is probably one of those.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd really agree that that's really, if you want to think about what makes sense from the standpoint of what foods you're going to bias your diet to, where you should be biasing your diet to is foods where the benefit to the body is going to way outweigh the amount of toxin that's available. And that's really a reasonable way to think about it, which I don't think we've generally considered, you know. So that is with this one a clear lose for anybody with the amount of oxalate that's in there. But you do have alternatives. So while I'm hoping that we'll actually still do a session on the clean 15, which is if you're going to bias your diet to a high cost benefit to your body, that these is where you would go. With chaga, where do you go if you want to enjoy some benefits from mushrooms? And we were talking about that a little bit earlier. So one of my choices would be lion's mane. Lion's mane mushroom doesn't have the same kind of extraordinarily high oxalate, and it does have some decent research on it on some of its benefits.
Turkey tail is another alternative. Cordyceps.
Cordyceps, yeah,
is another good lower oxalate alternative. And with these, you know, these are more medicinal as opposed to, you know, your button mushroom or your portobello. You know, I don't think you're going to be, you know, slicing up chaga and having a chaga burger.
Here's hoping not. Oh, that would make me cringe just thinking about that. So yeah, there might also be a difference between eating mushrooms and mushrooms where we use the extract from them. So I have one of those keto coffee products where they put mushroom extracts in it, and mine's got lion's mane in it. And I think that's quite beneficial. But yeah, I would definitely be avoiding chaga. And I think they recently added chaga to the recipe. So I'm going to have to abandon my coffee that's got the mushroom extracts in it because I'm not feeling comfortable even with small amounts of that one.
It's in a few of the low carb or keto creamer powders too. You know, they have one with it's can't remember what the brand is offhand, but it has 4 or 5 different mushrooms in the creamer, and chaga is one. And thankfully the serving size was like 3/4 of a teaspoon. I wasn't entirely sure about it, so I was doing like a 1/4 teaspoon. Found that I didn't like it and stopped. Thank you. So I'm kind of glad I did.
Yeah, sometimes we've dodged a bullet.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and it just brings home the point that, you know, when I first saw chaga, it was like, oh, it's a mushroom, so it must be low because most other mushrooms are low. And so don't assume, really, don't assume, ask around, you know, ask us, ask in the spreadsheet group, look in the spreadsheet, because we have been taking very much care of testing a lot of the stuff. And we've gotten some surprises. The first time I showed them, you know, well, chaga has a ton of oxalate. They didn't believe me when I said it was 20,000. They were like, what? It's like, yes. And then we looked again and we looked at several studies and it is in those levels. So let's start just being careful. Just be careful. Read your labels. You know, there's lots of coffee substitutes, and coffee is, you know, low oxalate drink. So you can actually have the real thing for its benefits. So
doing that right now as we speak.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's a great comment. I'm actually going to go do it in my computer. They asked us if we can put in writing the name of the 30 dozen ingredients, and also in writing the name of the alternatives. So yes, we will be doing that in the chat, and we will be sharing that also in an infographic.
Yeah, Yeah, we can cheerfully do that. Probably an infographic after the fact would be a great idea so that people can get the whole story in a picture.
I'm on it.
Susan, yes.
I just wanted to tell you that one time I was in a health food store and walking around, and I was kind of watching the tendency of everybody to be looking at what was there. And the big question in everybody's mind was, what is here that I've never seen before? Because maybe I can try something new. And so I think that's how a lot of us end up, trying some of the things and we don't really know what its status is, but we think, oh, well, that would be something new. I've never heard of that. And so I think a lot of manufacturers have caught on to this. And so they see their big push to be try to introduce something that nobody's heard of before, because then they'll think, oh, well, people will buy this just because they want to try something new. Have you seen that, ladies?
Yes.
Yeah, people are
Absolutely.
interested. They think new foods are fun, right?
Right. And so, I mean, some of the reasons that they're not things that people have used a lot is because people used them a long time ago and found out, ooh, this isn't so great. And so it sort of fell off the let's eat this list. And we don't always have the history of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next one, dear,
The
because
next one.
we've
Yeah.
got
Otherwise we'll
a
be
dozen.
Yeah, we have a dozen. So chia. Anybody want to start with chia? I heard the chortle.
Chia was used in Mexico for a long time, even as part of lemonade. It's been an addition, so they would make like lemon and sugar, and then they would add chia seeds. And that was the way the traditional lemonade was done here. But it was just a tiny bit of seeds. You would get a few, far and far in your glass. And that has been increasing. And then that chewy quality that the chia seed has been used for giving texture to many other things. And that's when we get in trouble. That's when the quantities start getting much larger. And this is one of those that it's a tiny seed with a bunch of oxalate in it.
Yeah. And if you really want something that's going to help with texture and
It's also a thickener.
thickening, that was what I was the word I was trying to get, thickening. Instead of going for chia seeds, which do turn out to be really incredibly high, especially if you're using them in the amounts that people would be using for things like jam substitutes that use chia for the thickening. For something like jam, I would go back to old-fashioned pectin and thicken that way, or thicken by cooking down, because that's not going to be adding in all this extraneous extra oxalate. But flax seeds are something that I've used both for baking and also for thickening, and you get that gelling kind of effect that you get with chia seeds, and at a fraction of the oxalate.
You've also got stuff like psyllium husks, or if you like gums, guar gum. We've tested that. A little goes a long way. She mentioned pectin, but also gelatin, like a Knox gelatin that they use in things like Jello, are good lower oxalate alternatives. And if you're looking for more of, let's say a healthier alternative, so flaxseed, psyllium husks, they get you the fiber, but they also thicken.
Yeah, so both of those would be good options and much better for you in terms of the oxalate levels, just a fraction of the kind of oxalate you have in chia seeds. I thought it was over 100 milligrams for like a teaspoon of it. I'm gonna check on our on our spreadsheet to make sure that I'm not quoting a wrong amount there. But in the meantime, Patricia, wouldn't you love to talk about gluten-free substitutions and tell your buckwheat story?
Oh, my buckwheat story. Yes. We actually started going gluten-free some 23 years ago. So there was not as much a range of substitutions as there were today. And we were taking whatever we could. At the beginning, we didn't really care about the nutrition or care about, where things were coming from or even what kind of ingredients were there. So long it was gluten-free and casein-free, it was going in my mouth and my daughter's mouth. And so even when Doritos was gluten-free and casein-free, if you can imagine that. Later on, with age comes wisdom. I started realizing that, trans fats and low quality salt and all those other goodies and, GMO corn and whatever were not making Doritos the best gluten-free option. So we started looking for some others. And going down the gluten-free way, we started getting into the minefield of high oxalate substitutions. You have buckwheat, especially, which we thought was, oh, it's an ancient wheat. It's got no funny management in there, and it's, there's pasta and there's all sorts of things with buckwheat. And actually, the pasta with buckwheat, I don't know if any of the people that are looking at us actually have tasted it. It's nasty. The texture is horrible. The taste is not particularly pleasant. But oh my God, I discovered oxalate was highly addictive with buckwheat pasta, because I would wake up and I would say, I'm getting some buckwheat pasta today. And then all of a sudden I realized, what? It's horrible. My kid's not even here. I could get some real pasta if I wanted to. And then I realized there's something in there that's addictive. So that was probably one of the first times in my experience where it started to click, that idea that oxalate is not only oxidative, but also addictive. And we stopped the buckwheat pasta. We started using as an alternative a lovely corn and rice pasta, which was a lot lower in oxalate. And guess what? It's not addictive.
Yeah. And that's
it
a
has
great,
a lovely texture as well.
Yeah, that's what we use too. And just so that people know, for the chia, 1 tablespoon is about 95 milligrams of oxalate, give or take. So that's a lot of oxalate, 1 tablespoon. Susan's got her hand up.
Well, I just wanted to say something about buckwheat because many years ago, I was asked to be a speaker in Germany. And I have spoken all over the planet, at different conferences. And I went to this one conference, and it was strange because at this conference, a lot of the kids with autism were running around the room and causing all kinds of disruptions. And I was not used to that. And I thought, what is different about these kids that they're having so many like behavioral issues and that kind of thing? And so that day at lunch, I was invited to go to someone's home, and they got out this big basket of bread, and it was all brown. And I was said, "What is this?" And what they said was that it was, buckwheat basically. And so I realized that in Germany they were using a lot more buckwheat than other places that I had done before. And so it was later that we discovered that buckwheat also has some anti-thiamine aspects to it. And where that gets kind of dicey is that we know now that our microbes in the gut use thiamine as a way to get rid of oxalate. Like they use genes that require thiamine to do that. And so you're getting kind of a double whammy then, that when you're doing buckwheat, you're not only compromising yourself by the amount of oxalate it contains, but also by its anti-thiamine qualities. So it's making it where you can't even degrade the oxalate that you're getting from other sources in your diet. So that's kind of as I said, a double whammy.
Okay, so our next category. Well, go ahead.
Alternatives.
Yeah, the other gluten-free alternatives, like, because there is quinoa can be kind of high and teff can be kind of high. So if anybody's playing in that area, but yeah, alternatives: rice, corn, millet. And if you can get fonio, 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 that is actually, we tried that here. It's a really nice tasting grain. It's in the millet family. And we liked it better than millet and better than a lot of the other alternatives. When I made it for my kids and they tried it, they were like, you can make this anytime. And then it became difficult to find on the market. It unfortunately kind of had fad status. It came for a little while and it disappeared. But if you can get it, it's a good one too.
Well, and when you're baking, it's rice flour, chickpea flour, cornstarch or potato starch. If you're looking for a thickener like amaranth, even tapioca starch, which is a little on the higher side, but very doable in small amounts.
And coconut flour, if you're baking a baked good, you
get
flour
in smaller amounts. If you want like a nut flour alternative.
Right. Susan?
Just want to say that, I've been doing this for about 30 years. And so when we first started with gluten and casein-free diet, everybody got great results and people were all excited about it. And then as the market changed and it became more of you can buy products that are pre-made for you, that was a great luxury that we didn't have before. But as soon as they started doing that, then they were introducing some of these other things like buckwheat and amaranth and quinoa and all of those things. And so that's when it started to be a different diet. People were not eating the same thing as the original people who were doing gluten and casein-free diet. So if you hear sort of a difference between parents who have older children and the new ones, it's because the way they do the diet's really different, and you need to be aware of that when you look at your ingredient list.
The movement to using nut flours as an alternative to gluten flours was a real disaster, I think, for a lot of people. Oh, but let's move on to that old-time favorite, spinach. And what we do to avoid spinach. So spinach is another one of those ones where you can get hundreds of milligrams of oxalate in one serving of it, depending upon how much you're having. And traditionally, we would have eaten it boiled and then creamed, which would have given you at least a reduction of the available soluble oxalate in something like spinach. And you would have had some dairy products with it if it's cream, so that might have given you some minerals that you could offset available soluble oxalate with. But you also only ate this very intermittently. When I was a kid, I was lucky if I ate spinach once or twice in a year because it was a fragile crop. It happened early. You picked it young, you ate it then, and then life went on and you ate other things. So nowadays we can eat raw spinach, which has all its oxalate intact, and we can do that 365 days a year. And this is not your friend.
Exactly. And also the other really big change is that when you wilt spinach, when you juice it, when you add to it, you can put an enormous amount of spinach into a green smoothie. So you can put 0.5 kilogram of spinach in a green smoothie. And that is just unheard of before. It was always in a smaller portion. And but anyway, even smaller portions would be problematic of raw or wilted spinach. So another one of those big myths is that, oh, if you steam it a little or if you boil it shortly, then all of the oxalate goes. It is not the case. It is a case of things like broccoli. Broccoli has a high percentage of soluble oxalate that would go in the water if you throw the water away. Spinach is not in that category. It has some soluble oxalate, but by far a ton of it stays in them. So just be very aware also of the portions of oxalate. And when you're reducing it, make sure that you reduce just a tiny bit of that portion. Don't say, okay, spinach is bad for me, I'm going to reduce it all, or I'm going to eliminate it today, because you're probably going to cause oxalate issues when you drop your level too fast, too soon.
Especially if you're eating so much of it at a time. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you are going to start considering going lower oxalate, spinach is something that you have to remove almost leaf by leaf. And so it's literally that high, and you want to go slowly. You do not want to go gung-ho on spinach and remove it all from today to tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Susan?
I went to a school where you had to eat everything on your plate before you could go to recess. And so sometimes they would have spinach, and nobody in my class liked spinach. And so I was the big spinach eater. Everybody would pile up their spinach on my plate, and I would eat it because I just loved spinach. And so one of the things that happened is that when I was 13 years old, I was given an antibiotic, which probably makes it where your microbes can't degrade oxalate. And I ended up 4 months later almost dying of bone marrow failure. And what's interesting about that is that they have found the same problems that happened in the bone marrow in certain people that have primary hyperoxaluria. And so there definitely can be a link there. And I just wanted people to realize that something that was okay for you before you had an antibiotic may stop being okay for you after you have the antibiotic, because the antibiotic is changing which microbes are surviving in your gut and can do different jobs of detoxification. And of course, this is relevant not only to oxalate, but it may be relevant to other toxins that could be in foods. And so just
and also, Susan, the fact that you loved spinach so much also deals like my buckwheat addiction. Yes. You know,
right.
Oxalate is addictive. So it's not normal, you know, quote unquote, that kids can eat 20 portions of anything.
Right. And as a tag along to that, if you see that you're suddenly attracted to something and you just keep going back and back and back and back, that even if it isn't oxalate, probably it is something that you need to examine a little bit more carefully to see what does this food contain and why am I drawn to this so that I want to have it every day at every meal. Food shouldn't be addictive.
And the good news is that there are lots of good alternatives. Yes. I think we could also kind of include Swiss chard in this, because like spinach, it's, you know, it's a green, but good alternatives: kale, collard greens, mustard greens, turnip greens, all sorts of lettuces, you know, cabbages, arugula, watercress, bok choy. Those are all low to very low, actually, to medium alternatives that will, you know, will give you a good nutrient profile and not good so much oxalate.
Well, and actually, if you like spinach, because I was one of those kids who liked spinach when I had it, radish greens are awesome.
Ah.
So I use them in some things where my Swiss grandmother would have used spinach, and works like a charm. Susan?
I just say I've posted on our group many times a slide that is showing about 2 different studies that were done in the 1930s. And what they were doing is feeding a bunch of rats a diet that had a baseline of all sorts of things, but then they were adding to it some kind of green. And so there was one study that was just basically spinach or not spinach. And then the other one was looking at spinach and various different greens like collard greens and turnip greens and whatever, kale. And what was interesting about that is that they were looking at the growth of the rats over this period of time that they did the study. And you can very definitely see that the more oxalate that the green contained, the less growth that you got in the rats. And so you can go look for that chart because I've posted it so many times on the group. It's unreal. But you can see that it really impaired their ability to grow. And not only that, but they also said in that study that they couldn't reproduce, and they said their teeth didn't mineralize, and there were just all kinds of terrible consequences. So it definitely was related to the amount of oxalate that was in the green when they compared a whole bunch of them.
Right. Okay. Our next oxalate dirty dozen candidate is the one everybody's gonna not be happy about, which is dark chocolate. So the problem with dark chocolate is that it's another, more concentrated source of oxalate. And as those of us who love chocolate, me too, understand, it's definitely got addictive qualities. But when you add chocolate and sugar together, some sort of magic happens. So, but unfortunately, especially dark chocolate, the oxalate level can be extraordinarily high. This is another one where, you can be getting hundreds of milligrams in a relatively small serving, especially if it's very dark chocolate. And so the healthier form that everybody talks about, where it's 90 or more percentage, dark chocolate, that's where you're actually going to be getting the bigger dose. So what can you do? Well, my favorite is something like a milk chocolate covered caramel, as long as you can handle the dairy. You get a little of your flavor, but you're not getting a big dose of oxalate all at once. Again, you're getting it with the dairy product. You might have a little bit of minerals available in there to be able to help with binding to some of the soluble oxalate. That may allow you to avoid absorbing some of it. So you can kind of do this antidote approach. But then there's also other good things, like chocolate extract to try and give chocolate flavor. And one of my favorites as well, white chocolate, which I believe Karla is also used for things, and so is Patricia. So what we're talking about here is, again, even if the food that you love is not loving you back, let's say, how about we go to something that will love you back? So, there are ways to get flavors and tastes, but not necessarily be loading yourself up on the oxalate. And Susan has a hand up here again.
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry, but my camera doesn't work. But anyway, I wanted one of you, if you'd like to talk about why they use dark chocolate so much in the carnivore diet. Anybody?
Oh, that's really trying to get, well, it's not so much carnivore as keto, right, Karla?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, in the carnivore world, chocolate wouldn't be considered an acceptable food because it's not animal based; it's plant based.
Well, it's really low carb for.
It's really low carb.
If you're using just the dark chocolate, there's not a lot of sweetener, and you can add a low carb sweetener, so you still end up getting the flavor. I'll be honest, I've been doing keto for over a year, and that was when I looked at one of the things that appears frequently it's lots of chocolate recipes. And, I really didn't pay attention to why they use it, because I already knew why I wasn't going to use it. So, but I suspect that's why it's also the dark chocolate is high in antioxidant. So, they're touting a health perspective. Another thing is cocoa powder, along with the dark chocolate, we use cocoa powder, folks use it a lot for the cakes, the cookies, good alternatives. Maya nut powder, if you can find it. The medium and dark roast are much lower oxalate. A little goes a long way. Add a little bit of chocolate extract and even a little bit of coffee. And that boosts the chocolate flavor. So there aren't too many, from a powder perspective, there's not too many alternatives, but Maya nut powder is a pretty good one.
Yeah,
Yes,
Patricia?
I think the cocoa and the chocolate became really important in keto because it's a comfort food. And, when people start going into a restricted diet, there's a lot of frustration. Changing your diet habits, it's kind of like changing religion. It's really changing something that's deep inside your culture and the way you live. And chocolate has always been put as, as something to be festive about and happy about. All the publicity goes around that. So it would be a very good sell to say, okay, you can't have some high carb potato, but you can have chocolate. So, it was kind of like a very sexy exchange. On the other hand, I would like to touch a little bit of this on this emotional bit of the diet. But before that, I would like to just mention that for those of us that have kids on the spectrum, one of the things that really caught my attention was a survey that was done by the Autism Research Institute with parents when they said, these are the medications that normally kids get prescribed, and you got to put your own opinion as a parent. I mean, this is not scientific at all. This was really just collecting information from parents. And it's like, medication, did it help? Did it not? Did it change? Nothing, and non-medication things, did it help? Did it not? And then there was the foods and the special diets. And it was really interesting to me that even above, if not, I don't remember exactly, but it was right up there in the top 5 interventions, food interventions that caused a positive result in kids with autism was removing chocolate. And to me, that was just like, it was even more important than removing gluten. And it was, and I was like, why would that be? And it was later on when I realized that chocolate was just so high in oxalate. And so that makes you wonder, a lot of the things that people say or that people mention, and it's like, oh, but this is good, this diet is fantastic, and whatever. It might be just removing that one ingredient that starts to make a difference so that you know that you're on the right track. And just going into that, decision of going into a more restricted diet. I think if we come from a place where, oh my gosh, I can eat all these other wonderful things, and I can be, and I can have new adventures and new experiences and new tastes and whatever, instead of thinking I cannot do this. If you come, I was yesterday, while I was presenting my book, I was with a group of people that had all different types of handicaps. And I met this woman that was just absolutely incredible. She was an Olympic gymnast training for the Olympics when she had a bad accident and became partially paralyzed. So she has trouble walking and whatever. And she told me something that I think would be really useful to this discussion, because she said, I have a radio program that doesn't talk about all the issues that I cannot do, but it focuses on everything that I can do and the change that I can make. And the fact that this is where I am right now, and what am I going to do with this now? And I thought that was just so powerful. This woman had the biggest grin on her face, and she was just enjoying life, even though she had, yes, an accident so many years ago. But it was just such a vibrant, beautiful human being that you were like, oh my gosh, this, everybody needs to talk to this woman, really. I mean, she gives makeup classes to the blind people, and so that they could look their best and be beautiful and be, agreeable to everybody. And it's just, all these concepts of just, this is what we have. This is the decision we're going to take. We're going to go low oxalate because I love me, and I'm going to feed my body with what is best for him or her. And I'm going to take the decision from a place of joy and from a place of possibility, and not from a place of, restriction and overwhelm, and not being able to do these things that I like, and it's a tragedy because I cannot. And I think, chocolate's probably the best platform to talk about those things, because it is a comfort food. It's been used as comfort food for many, many years. It comes from my culture. I'm Mexican. And before, it was a sacred food, and it was spicy. It was not mixed with sugar. Original chocolate was spicy. It was hot. They actually put hot peppers in it. And there were like some properties and whatever, but it was always taken in small amounts. And in the beginning, it was just a priest that could eat it. So, when you go back to the history, you start understanding all these things. But anyway, so chocolate's it's a big deal, a big possibility for improvement, and there are alternatives. So the Maya nut works well, and the white chocolate's perfect. It gives you that chocolatey taste without the punch of oxalate.
I would just like to add that the reason I said something about carnivore was that, we have a huge carnivore group. I don't know if you've noticed the numbers there, but I think it's over 2,000 now. And so we had a lot, that group started growing because we had people who were doing carnivore. And then the carnivore people started recognizing that this experience that they were, a lot of them were getting, that suddenly they had these terrible symptoms come on suddenly. And then there was enough mixture with our group that people realized that could be dumping. And so within the carnivore community, people were taking little bits of dark chocolate to stop this terrible thing that was happening to them. And so, a lot of you probably have heard that if you're dumping, that one of the ways that you can slow it down is by taking a little bit of something a little higher oxalate, and that kind of triggers the body to think, okay, I don't have to dump right now. And so I do want to bring that out, that is a big reason why people on carnivore, or maybe even some other diets, may take a teeny bit of dark chocolate. Have you heard that, ladies?
Yes.
Okay.
I need to say it's only people who are oxalate literate who are doing that. You go out to the carnivore world outside of the TLO groups, they're not recommending dark chocolate, I guarantee you. But for those who have at least figured out that this process they might otherwise call adaptation has actually got something to do with their previous high oxalate diet, those people may be doing it. But I think it's not something in the carnivore world necessarily in general, but yeah.
Well, I mean, that's where we started hearing about it, was just people coming in that were carnivore. So I don't know the history of it. You've probably examined that a little bit more than I have, Monique, but we had never even heard of doing that. And then suddenly we had people coming in that said that that was how they were stopping whatever it was, and they didn't know why it worked.
But that's a really good comment. It is true. If you are taking some, if you're dropping and you're feeling miserable, raising your oxalate level a little bit can mitigate the symptoms. But just remember that it depends on how big your drop was. So if you're dropping, from 2 kilos of spinach to nothing, a little square of chocolate is probably not going to cut it. So you just have to, remember that you have to drop it slowly so that you control those dumping symptoms.
So we're now to our famous friends, almonds, and most of the other high oxalate nuts. And we're only halfway through our list. And we're also almost an hour in. So our chatty bunch might have to split this into the second half of the Dirty Dozen discussion. But let's at least get the discussion about nuts here, because they are, especially with the almonds, another really high oxalate offender.
Oh, I was an almond nut. I used to buy almond flour on wholesale because I was using so much. And one of the things is that it's a great substitute for flours. And again, it's gluten free, so it sounded like the perfect alternative. And I fell into that bandwagon easily. I mean, I just went head on. And when we started going into the specific carbohydrate diet, the nut flours and the nut breads and everything were excellent, gluten-free alternatives. And they were delicious and they were nutritious and they packed a punch and they satisfied that sweet tooth. And it was just brilliant. And then we got our oxalate issue.
Yeah.
And this is what happens many times when you start doing something, you start feeling better, you start seeing things because you are actually removing some toxins or removing some things that are troubling you. And then it's with the accumulation of oxalate that you start getting the back kick. So almonds for us was our biggest culprit. Then we started, saying, oh, we probably need some variety. So why not? Let's just take some other high oxalate nuts. And we used to take, all sorts of all sorts of nuts, and it was just miserable. We were
Yeah.
just doing all of that until we got to incredible levels. So lots of alternatives. I would just like to remind everybody that these two lovely nutritionists have done lots of recipe books that are available on in Amazon that have all these different alternatives. So if you look at the list that Karla just posted in the notes on gluten-free flours that I'm going to put on an infomercial in an infographic, you're going to see that there's lots of alternatives that don't need the nuts.
And when we're talking about nuts, there are some which are lower oxalate. So you can go to baru nuts, which I really like. If you like almonds, we did here. If you like peanuts, we did here. Baru nuts are quite tasty because they taste kind of like a cross between an almond and a peanut. So very, very nice alternative. And smaller amounts of things like macadamia nuts or walnuts or pecans can also work. So we would use like I would make trail mix for my kids when they went to school, and we would have white chocolate chips. We would have a few macadamia nuts. We would have raisins, and we would so it looked like another kid's trail mix. I would throw in maybe some low oxalate rice checks or something. My kids, their food was everybody else wanted their food because it looked good. So it doesn't have to be that this whole idea of I can't. No, you can. You can. It can look just as tasty and wonderful as other people's food if you're willing to explore a little bit what your alternatives can be. Oh, I can't hear you, Miss Karla.
Sorry, pistachios.
Pistachios. And I never think of those, but those are another good one too. Yeah. Yeah. So we use little amounts of that, white chocolate chips, Rice Chex cereal, craisins, which are cranberries or raisins, and then maybe a gluten-free pretzel stick, or they're called snap peas, I think, Harvest Crisps. So your kid ends up with a thing that looks like nuts and bolts, which other people can buy on a package at a store, but theirs is actually, it's low oxalate, and it probably has more nutrition in it and more options too.
Exactly. And the other thing is that if you're lowering from baking a cake with almonds and decorating it with almond slices and using all sorts of things, you have to drop it slowly. So this is another one where, there's a ton of oxalate in a cup of almond flour. So it's if you want to start dropping it, but continue to use some almond pieces and something like that on your journey down, that's okay. But just remember that there is a lot of almonds in a cup of almond flour.
Yeah, I think about 300 milligrams of oxalate in almonds themselves. And if you go to like a half cup, and if you go to a half cup of the flour, I think it's 400 milligrams oxalate, because obviously you have less air spaces between the nuts. So yeah.
I guess we're at the top of the hour, dear.
We are at the top of the hour. So for everyone who came today, thank you. It's lovely to have people attend so that we can do this live to folks who are listening. The video will go up on our YouTube channel so that you can always go back and review it there. And this has been the first half of our Dirty Dozen. So we'll come back with the last half of our Dirty Dozen and our honorable mentions. And yeah, we will also be looking on a go forward basis, not just how do you substitute for the stuff that you don't want to have in your diet, but maybe even how do you go towards more nutrient dense, lower toxin, certainly lower oxalate kind of eating, because you can bias your diet in a direction where you're going to get more benefits from what you eat. And if we think about our food not as fuel, but as replacement parts, stop and think about that for a moment, because your body rebuilds from what you feed it. If it was just fuel, like your car, you put gas in, it burns it off, right? But the car is already built and the car is going to remain what it is. But your body's not like that. You're rebuilding and remodeling constantly. You want to be building that with the best quality materials possible, because that's what you're going to live in next week, next month, next year, next decade. So we really want to be able to encourage people to eat well, eat enjoyably, eat for your health.
Absolutely.
Okay, folks, well, we are going to wind up for now. I'm going to turn off the recording. And for those of you who have a few moments to stay, we'll be here for a few moments afterwards. You can open up your mics and so on once we've turned off the recording. Again, thank you for attending, and we will be back in a couple weeks with another Wizards of Ox Live. Thanks, everyone.